Hey, it's Sunny from HealthSpan. Today we're going to be diving into the world of the glucose goddess because apparently it takes a god complex to start handing out health advice with a CGM strapped to your arm.
You ask me if I have a god complex? Let me tell you something. I am God.
Her real name is Jessie Inchauspé. I probably butchered that. Apologies, my French is not that good. She's a social media influencer with a background in biochemistry who went viral wearing a continuous glucose monitor despite not having diabetes. That alone got her a lot of attention. But then came the blood sugar hacks, the books, and of course the supplements. Her anti-spike formula, to be exact.
Anti-spike formula. He says that it will moderate glucose spikes by up to 40% if taken before a carb-rich meal.
She's essentially telling everybody that they need to go buy this $65 per month supplement, which has no evidence to support it. Many critics of her have said that she propagates pseudoscience, she advocates a method that is not supported by evidence, and the studies that she cites routinely are either anecdotal, false, completely misinterpreted, or not relevant to the things she's claiming.
Because no wellness brand is truly complete without an unresearched pill claiming to flatten your glucose curve. In this video, we're going to be going through her most popular claims, run them through the scientific shredder, and see what holds up and what spikes your BS radar. And by that, I don't mean your blood sugar. Let's start with the first claim.
What happens is what I call a glucose spike. The more spikes you have, the faster you die.
I'm just going to be completely upfront here. This is flat out wrong. You could take someone who's, say, in peak condition, a fit 30-year-old who eats well, sleeps 8 hours a day, lifts weights, runs marathons, and you'd still see that glucose go up and down throughout the day. This is a normal physiological process, and I may be wrong, but to my knowledge, there's no correlation in any study between the frequency of glucose spikes and mortality. Glucose levels rise after eating or exercising and fluctuate in response to stress, sleep, hormonal changes, caffeine, and well, just everyday life. So this idea that the flat glucose line is this holy grail of health, it's not just misleading, it's physiologically absurd. And of course, once you're convinced these natural, healthy glucose fluctuations are a crisis, here comes the anti-spike formula to fix you. It's a textbook play. Invent the problem and then sell the cure. The real danger is the fear this creates. People start freaking out over eating an apple, or worse, thinking butter-drenched bacon is healthier than fruit because it keeps your glucose flat, and that glucose spikes are what are going to kill you. And to make all this sound legitimate, she cites numerous studies such as...
Two studies I'll mention. The first one is called Postprandial Hyperglycemia as an Etiological Factor in Vascular Disease. Number 2 is Oscillating Glucose is more deleterious to endothelial function and oxidative stress than mean glucose in normal and type 2 diabetic patients.
Now look, I actually like that she cites research, because this is how science works. You make a claim, you show your evidence, and then the rest of us get to look at it, dissect it, and tell you why you're wrong. Let's start with this oscillating glucose study. This was a hyperglycemic clamp experiment. That means they didn't feed people real meals, they infused glucose directly into their bloodstream and kept it elevated for hours. In a healthy person, blood glucose spikes quickly after eating and then drops back to normal within 2 hours. That's a normal postprandial curve. But this study bypassed digestion, bypassed insulin regulation, bypassed normal physiology entirely. It mimicked what happens in poorly controlled diabetes, not healthy individuals. And even then, this model is arguably more extreme than what most diabetics experience. In real life, even in type 2 diabetes, glucose tends to eventually come down, it just takes longer. Holding glucose flat and high for hours with a hyperglycemic clamp as was the case in this study, is not something that happens just after eating mango. So what is this study showing? That prolonged artificially sustained hyperglycemia can impair vascular function? That's already well known, no one's debating that. But using this to argue that a healthy person needs to flatten every single glucose rise after a meal, and then subsequently using that to sell an anti-spike formula is just fear-mongering. The key point to take away from this is that injecting glucose into someone's bloodstream in a lab is not the same as eating food. Food has fiber, protein, fat, incretin, hormones, gut peptides, insulin responses, a whole orchestra of signals that regulate glucose naturally. And this brings us to one of her next favorite lines.
Somehow, we believe that if it's orange and it's fresh squeezed, then it's good for you. But if it's in a can of soda, then it's bad for you. The truth is, your body doesn't care where the molecules come from. Your body just processes sugar, whatever its source. So that's why, to me, an orange juice is just as bad for you as a can of Coke, because they both contain 25 grams of sugar.
At first glance, this sounds sciencey. It sounds like she's just cutting through the noise. But it's just flat out wrong. This kind of oversimplification is exactly the problem with her content. It reduces nutrition to one variable, sugar, and ignores everything else that comes with it: fiber, micronutrients, phytochemical satiety signals, and hormonal responses. Remember that oscillating blood glucose study with the hypoglycemic clamp she mentioned earlier? Yeah, well, it showed that this exact endothelial damage and oxidative stress caused by erratic BGLs is reversed when vitamin C is given. You know a fruit very high in vitamin C? Yeah, you guessed it, oranges. But anyway, let's look a bit further at additional research that is out there. There's quite a recent study that compared soda versus orange juice. The study basically made fake orange juice, they made orange drink, and then compared that to orange juice. Anyway, you can see that the blood sugar spikes were much higher with the orange drink compared to the 100% orange juice in virtually every metric. This was even shown when adjusting for the total amount of carbohydrates, which is in the bottom right picture. And as a disclaimer, it was funded by the Florida orange industry, so you know it could be potentially argued that Big Orange is out there to deceive you. That being said, it was clearly documented they weren't involved in the design of the study, and the study is peer-reviewed. But yes, I agree, we may need to take it with a grain of salt or perhaps a little squirt of citrus. So what about the epidemiological studies? Well, have a look at this study, which showed that individuals who consumed orange juice on average had a lower total BMI, total cholesterol, and LDL cholesterol. And here is a scoping review, systematic review, and meta-analysis, which states that 100% fruit juices show similar vitamin and mineral contents as equal quantities of whole fruit. They retain much of the antioxidant nutrients and phytochemicals, which can reduce both inflammation and chronic disease risk and support human health. Anyway, let's go into the third point, which is cholesterol. She says, and I quote, "Half the people who have a heart attack have normal levels of cholesterol. It's about inflammation and triglyceride to HDL ratio. That tells you much more about the health." Yes, the old cholesterol doesn't matter trope sounds compelling, but it's misleading. In this claim, the glucose goddess downplays the importance of cholesterol, presumably to shift the focus towards the triglyceride to HDL ratio, a marker more closely tied to insulin sensitivity and metabolic syndrome, which is her area of interest. However, the argument that half the people who have a heart attack have normal cholesterol does not imply that cholesterol isn't causative. That logic is flawed, and let me explain why. First, a large proportion of people who suffer heart attacks are already on lipid-lowering medication. This typically means they've only started treatment later in life after decades of exposure to elevated cholesterol levels. What's crucial to understand is that cholesterol-driven atherosclerosis is cumulative. It's the long-term exposure to high LDL that drives plaque formation. Even if the cholesterol is lowered later, the damage may have already been done. Residual risk persists because the burden of plaque reflects years of unchecked LDL exposure. Second, and this is critical, cholesterol levels drop after a heart attack. There's a well-documented acute phase response where cholesterol can fall by 48% after myocardial infarction. So again, drawing someone's blood after they've just had a heart attack is not always going to give you an indication of the total cholesterol post-event. Third, even quote-unquote normal LDL cholesterol levels can still cause atherosclerosis. One study, normal LDL cholesterol levels are associated with subclinical atherosclerosis in the absence of risk factors, found that plaque was still forming in people with LDLs we'd traditionally call fine. It's not until you get the LDL down to 70 or 80 where you start seeing a meaningful reduction in plaque burden. So this idea that cholesterol only matters if it's high enough to set off a red light on your blood test, that's outdated thinking. And finally, we have decades of randomized controlled trials, genetic studies, and Mendelian randomization data, which shows that lowering LDL cholesterol reduces your cardiovascular risk. Obviously, if you really want to be precise, what predicts risk best isn't just LDL, it's ApoB, the number of atherogenic particles in your bloodstream. This narrative review, ApoB and cardiovascular disease, lays this out clearly. The more ApoB particles you have, the more bullets you're firing at your arteries' walls. So no, it's not just about inflammation or your triglyceride to HDL ratio. Whilst those markers may matter, they don't replace primary causal factors like ApoB. In fact, the current evidence suggests the cardiology community is shifting away from emphasizing the triglyceride to HDL ratio as a central metric and instead recognizing ApoB containing lipoproteins, especially LDL, as the key drivers of atherosclerosis.
The triglyceride to HDL ratio might be very useful.
Actually, so in cardiology, we no longer focus on triglyceride to HDL ratio because now we know that the most important prognostic factor is ApoB.
And just FYI, your non-HDL cholesterol is mostly made up of LDL cholesterol, which is the real problem. If you're interested in diving deeper in this topic, I have 2 other videos you should check out. Number 1, why Paul Saladino is wrong about cholesterol. He's someone very prominent in the carnivore community. And 2 is the keto LDL study, which accidentally showed that LDL is dangerous. So watch those if you're curious, and I will see you in the next one.